The next morning a boy arrived to conduct Bruckner, Nima, and Eltuhlich to General Aleksander. The lad led them through the busy, hot Eltuhlichian streets. They were heading steadily southward. They walked for perhaps 20 minutes or so until they saw a large encampment spread on a vast green lawn. The Severan army had evidently taken up temporary residence in what looked like a park district within the town. A stream was running through the fields, and several youngsters sat fishing with homemade poles in an area cordoned off for civilian use. Armed guards held the perimeter. Inside were rows of tents and fire pits. The boy led them to the center of the camp, bowed quickly, and was off, leaving the adventurers outside of a tent, inside of which they could hear Toral's booming voice. A guard stationed outside raised a hand in salute and said, "The general has been awaiting your arrival. Please, go in." Once inside, Bruckner and Nima saw that General Aleksander's tent was arrayed almost exactly as it had been the first time they had met him, in Amenia. His weapon rack stood against the southern wall of the tent, and a simple soldier's cot lay in the northeast corner. The space was dominated by a huge table covered with scrolls and books, a large map of Savar in the center. Toral and Aleksander looked up from the map as the three entered.
"Bruckner, Nima."
The general was dressed in a simple white robe, overset with a red cloak, secured at the shoulder with the Bastoran star crest.
"And Eltuhlich, if I remember aright."
He looked at the little gnome.
"I recall your service some years ago. With Toral here, you are most welcome."
Eltuhlich bowed deeply, obviously very much in awe of the man. The general reached for a decanter of water and poured out 3 glasses, offering them to the group.
"Please make yourselves comfortable. There isn't much, but you're welcome to what I have."
The general surveyed them with a glint of almost fatherly pride in his eye.
"You have done great things for me and for Savar. I will be honest, I did not expect to see the king alive again. You have brought us what we needed most, information. Toral has told me something of what you found. Even as we speak, the lords are gathering for King Johannes's hearing. It will be the day after tomorrow, perhaps the day after that, but for now, you must tell me everything. Spare no detail."
Bruckner told the general everything, including his intimations regarding the king's state of mind and his fears of possible collusion against the monarch from within. Aleksander listened intently to all that Bruckner had to say, nodding occasionally.
"You are right to be worried. Such facts are not lost on me. It is good, though, to hear that you had that intimation upon finding the king. It is a terrible thing for a king to betray his people, and I did not relish the thought that he had done so willingly."
He then turned to Nima and Eltuhlich.
"I would hear your version of events as well."
They did so, Nima in particular painting a rather different picture of the king. He listened to all they had to say, pondered, then brightened.
"Very well,"
he said at last.
"You have all done a great deed of service, and well earned your commission."
He gestured to Toral, who brought forth a bag of coin for each member of the party.
"It is not every day that a group of young adventurers helps to restore peace to Savar. I'll expect you at the hearing the day after next, or after, depending. Feel free to stay at the inn now. I will see to it that your bill is paid."
He smiled briefly, turning back already to Toral as he gestured them out.
"A fine young swordsman like you, Bruckner. Perhaps you would benefit from trying your hand in the Fighter's Hall while you are here. People have another name for the arena, and it is no place to trifle with, but I think you would make an admirable showing. And you, Miss Nima, perhaps you would not mind coming back this evening. I have a scouting mission for which your skills are especially suited. Thank you all again. I will see you shortly."
Having obtained the finances necessary to enchant his sword, Bruckner requested that the group return to the Emporium to have this work done. Once inside, Bruckner sought out the wizened mage in the corner, who took the sword eagerly, saying,
"This is a fine weapon, son. A holy enchantment is my very favorite to cast, and I can see that you will swing this in the defense of goodness and right."
The mage retreated a ways into a small working area, where 2 young elven lads assisted him. One held the sword carefully over an anvil spread with damask. The second poured a handful of fine silver dust into an open palm, then very slowly began to dust the sword in a thin stream of the substance. The mage began to chant in a celestial tone, his voice reverberating around the small space in the back of the shop. As he sang, his hands emitted soft, effusive light that seemed to bind together the metallic dust and the gleaming black adamantine of the blade. The sword became enveloped in a bright glow, like the heart of a muted sun, but it was obviously heatless, and the elves and the mage were unaffected by it. The wizard ran his hands down the blade, as though shaping the energy around the sword's natural lines. This process continued for some time, singing, shaping, reshaping. After an hour, the song hit a final piercing note, and the energy seemed to fix itself, appearing like an ethereal sword soul manifesting itself in hues of blue and white. Then the song wound down, and the sword ceased its glowing, looking as it always had. The mage handed it back to Bruckner with a soft smile. As he gripped the hilt, he felt a rush of energy, similar to the energy he had often felt while praying at Eliam's temple, and Bruckner knew his hand would now strike even more true against the foul creatures of the dark. Bruckner thanked the mage respectfully, admiring his work. Tadalak had been doing his own shopping in the meantime. He walked up to Bruckner, proudly showing off a dagger in a small red leather sheath. "What do you think, Ox? Now I can be on the front lines with you."
"That's a fine dagger, Tadalak, and you will deserve to wear it."
"I just saw little sister talking to one of the shopkeepers. She's going to stay and train with a new type of crossbow all afternoon. You want to go and find that dwarf and do a fight in the arena? Tadalak will cheer you on."
"Shall we find that dwarf?"
"To the Drunken Dragon, then." Leaving Nima to her training, Bruckner and Tadalak headed back to the bar, finding it much more sparsely populated than the night before. A massive hulk of a dwarf was sleeping it off on a bench against the far wall, snoring loudly, an empty tankard still gripped in one hand. There were a few tables with customers, most enjoying fried tomatoes and bacon. Bagor was behind the bar, yelling at two young dwarves about the proper way to pluck a goose. He looked up when the two entered and said, "Bruckner, old boy, glad to see you back. Ready for the ring, are you? As chance has it, there's an opening at noon in just 2 hours. You up for it?"
"I am. What are the rules of the ring?"
"Rules?" He looked puzzled for a moment, then began to nod as though remembering the term. Yeah, I see what you mean. No rules, boys, save the chain to allowed to cast no magics in the ring. Magical enchantments on your gear and such, well, that's fine, but no casting of spells. This is a warrior's ring. But I don't expect that'll be a problem for you, will it?" Bagor sent a young dwarf running to the fighters' hall to announce Bruckner's intention of taking the noon slot, then told Bruckner and Tadalak they were welcome to hang out in the tavern until fight time. They exchanged stories and had a bite to eat. When noon rolled around, Bagor took off his apron, handed it to a young dwarf, and said, "The place is yours. I'll be back in a few hours." He gestured for Bruckner and Tadalak to follow him. They walked through the town straight to the very center of the city. They could see the large circular walls of a fighting coliseum from a ways off, an impressive structure to be sure. It was both brutal and beautiful in form, with harsh black razored stone turrets rising up into the orange sky, overtopping marble bas-relief murals of fighters in all imaginable scenarios, battling horrific beasts as well as squaring off against one another. Boys were bawling out the day's fight schedule and handing out lists of upcoming bouts, and the adventurers noticed a large poster tacked on a wooden board and set on an easel. It portrayed a huge half-orc with a hairy chest and a great axe, grimacing terribly. Above the representation were the words, "The Grey King, undisputed champion." Bagor nodded at the picture and said, "That's crumb with a Grey King as he's taking to calling himself. That boy's gotten too big for his britches. Why, in my day, we didn't self-aggrandize like that. And I'll tell you true, I won more fights than that boy ever has. Anyway, you won't be fighting him for a while yet, if at all. Come on, let's see who you'll be warring." He led them up past the main window where tickets were being sold, through a side entrance that he unlocked with a heavy iron key. They walked through a tunnel lit by sunlight pouring in from grating holes in the ceiling. They came into a well-lit central area, also lit by ceiling grates. A hard-looking man was busy with some paperwork. Bagor cleared his throat and said, "Braden, I got a new man for you here. This is Bruckner from Cormorant. He's up for the noon fight slot, like I said." Braden looked up and surveyed Bruckner closely. He limped forward and came nose to nose with Bruckner, then strode slowly around him, taking him in, watching the way he held himself.
"You ever fight in the ring before, boy?"
"Not one like this."
"You got a pair on you, I'll give you that. Look sturdy enough, too."
He walked back to his desk, pulled a piece of parchment from it, and set it down next to an inkwell and quill.
"Sign here. Standard agreement to the dangers and willingness to be resurrected should you go down in the fight. Of course, you'll have to impress the crowd first."
He smiled after Bruckner signed. Not a pretty sight, but it appeared genuine. He seemed to look at Bruckner with something closer to esteem now.
"Well, glad you're aboard, Bruckner. You got a tough fight ahead."
He slapped him on the arm and gestured down the hall for someone out of sight.
"Brixton will get you set up. Good luck."
As he headed back for his desk, Bagor laughed heartily and said, "Well, that was painless, eh? Oh, I guess that weren't the part that was meant to hurt." He looked at Tadalak and said, "Come on, lad, we can go sit in the box and watch your friend fight." Tadalak patted Bruckner on the arm as they left, saying, "You can do it, Ox." After they had left, a woman appeared from the hallway down which Braden had beckoned. To Bruckner's shock, he saw that she was an Andolai, one of those who had wandered and returned different. He made as if to grip his sword and began to adopt a defensive posture, but the blue-skinned woman held out hands of weary peace, apparently accustomed to the greeting.
Don't worry,
Braden said, limping past.
I raised her like my own. She ain't like the rest.
The Andoli were an ancient sect of elves who had found a gate to another plane millennia before and had vanished from the sunlit lands entirely. 5 centuries ago, some had returned, and they had borne little resemblance to the creatures of this world. Blue and glowing of skin, with star-crossed eyes and fey countenances, the otherworldly star-dwellers spoke in flaming tongues of inky night and cosmic fire, weaving terrible magics from planes far removed from the fields we know. Much of the warfare over the past several centuries had seen the Andoli in the center of it, and their numbers had been reduced in many bloody conflicts. Aside from certain areas of the Woven Lands to the north of the Phausian Sea, the Andoli lived a scattered existence now at the margins of the world, hated and shunned for their fearful rituals and alien desires. Bruckner was taken aback by the apparent civility of a creature he had been taught was unequivocally evil, having no place among civilized folk. She seemed quite in control, though, as she said, "Come along, then. Let's get you to your starting position. My name is Rixton," she told Bruckner as they walked down yet another stone corridor with lattice patches of sunlight coming in through overhead grating. "I'm glad you came along. We were just going to send in one of our regular boys to fight Perm today, but the crowd gets tired of seeing the same fighters. A fresh face and set of moves is always more exciting." She stopped in front of a heavy iron grate. Past it was the arena, a dusty circle of sand streaked with blood, utterly devoid of ornamentation. 200 feet across the sandy pitch, Bruckner could see faintly, shimmering in the heat given off by the ground, an identical gate. Rixton studied Bruckner and said seriously, "Now remember, this isn't a game. Lots of first-timers tend to take it too easy on their opponents, being chivalrous and such. But Perm's a seasoned veteran, and you can bet he won't go easy on you. You go in there and kill him. There are clerics on hand, and we don't let our own die permanently. They're too valuable to us. Go in there and bury your sword in his heart, win gold and honor. Like as not, he'll want to buy you a drink afterwards." She patted Bruckner on the arm and turned to walk back down the tunnel. "When the gate raises, the fight is on," she said. "Good luck."